For many Excel users, the most common chart types are column charts, and we see 3 of them here in the upper part of the screen, and bar charts. We see those below the column charts. They're very similar in nature, and as you compare the 2 charts, looking first, upper left corner, the most common chart type, the default chart type, unless you've changed it, a clustered column chart. Below that, a clustered bar chart. I think you can see that the clustered column chart, for a lot of people, is going to be a little bit better just because it's easier to read. Now, sometimes maybe that's a subjective opinion, but as you look at the 2, I think you can see the data a little bit more clearly there. In the middle of the screen here, we've got 2 different versions of what we call a stacked column on the top, a stacked bar below. And here we see the data in a more concise way. It's cleaner looking, easier to read perhaps, and we can see the totals at a glance. It might not have been so obvious when we're looking at the clustered column chart that February was bigger than March, but we see that more clearly on the clustered column chart in the middle here. What might not be so easy to read here is the actual value of a given region. For example, Europe, as we're following these orange colors. Do we see those as clearly? The blues we can see okay because they're at the base, but otherwise the pieces maybe are not so hard to see. But from time to time, consider that option. There are times when a clustered column chart might appear to be too crowded. Switch it to a stacked column chart, and you're likely to have a cleaner display. The 2 versions we see on the right side are what we call 100% stacked. They're not nearly as frequently used, and they're partially there to answer the needs of people who need to break out information as you might in a pie. But in a pie, we can only do one range at a time. The danger of these is you can misread them proportionally. If we're looking at, for example, the green panel on the left here, that's the value 110. How about the green value to the right? That's 120. Well, why isn't it bigger? Well, this represents a smaller portion of the February total, the 120 that we see here. Now, the data here is below all this. We could have that a little bit more prominently placed so we could go back and forth and read it. But the point is, the total amounts here are broken out into percentages. Now, there is a role to be played here, but I think it's one of those charts where you probably have to explain to your audience, if you're making a presentation, as to how to read these. Nevertheless, they have their usage. And below this, we see a bar chart version of the same thing. The question might come up at different times, well, why would I use a bar versus a column? And I think most of the time you're probably going to be favoring column charts. But here's a situation where maybe a bar chart's going to look better. Off to the right here. Got some data out here in columns Y and Z. So I'm going to click within the data here and simply press Alt F1 to quickly create a clustered column chart. That's the default chart type in Excel. And the problem I think you can see is reading the labels down below. Now, we could possibly slant them. That's one of the options that you see in the chart styles option that we see at the top of the screen here. So we could do that. But let's turn this into a bar chart and see the difference. Change chart type. This is the option that appears on the Design tab when a chart is selected. Let's switch this to a bar chart. Clustered bar right here. And you can see in the preview what we're about to see. First, it might not look so good, and that option that shows the numbers probably isn't what we want, but I'll make this a bit taller. I think we have no trouble reading the labels at all here. So once again, the chart styles options that we see up here are likely to be a bit better, perhaps like this. And I think you can make a case for saying the bar chart version of this is easier to read than a column version of this. I'll press Control Z a few times and go back to where this was looking like a column chart. And then I'll press Control Y to go back to bar. So there could be situations like that. And certainly at different times you'll have a favorite, and possibly in your organization, maybe bar charts are favored for whatever reason, maybe historical reasons. So the difference between the two sometimes is minimal, but recognize they work pretty much the same way. There's one other variation you might take note of. If you're working with a chart, or perhaps you're about ready to create a chart with this data right here, I've got it highlighted. To create a column chart, we can go to the Insert tab. The icon for column bars together looks like a column, but the drop arrow to the right alerts us to the fact that we have some other opportunities here for choosing column, 3 different kinds of 2D column, 3 different kinds of 2D bar. Notice for the 3D variations, there are 3 variations for bar charts, but 4 for the column charts. And that 4th one is one you will see from time to time. It is kind of an attention getter. A common problem is that we can't always see all of the columns. Now, as we look at this back and forth, this yellow column in the background actually represents one of the Latin American entries, And you can see by the numbers over to the left why they're hidden. They're much smaller, and they're in the 4th row back there. So I'm going to right-click. Actually, you can right-click any one of these columns here and choose Select Data. And it's Latin America that we want to either move up or move down. Now, sometimes based on the look of the arrows here, you can tell we can only use the move up arrow here. So I'll click it 3 times to move that entire Latin America series forward or upward toward the front of the columns. And we see that. The blue columns represent domestic, and they're blocking some of the others. Not completely, but we'll click one of the domestics. And you can either click down here first on one of the domestic ones and then come up here, or simply click domestic, and we'll move that. Notice how we say move up, move down. Move down actually means move back in this case. So we'll click that twice and put those in the background. And then OK. So that's a reasonable look. Now, not so well known is if you double click either in the chart area or the plot area, the dialog box Format Chart area gives us some other opportunities for changing this. And one of the options that you might not be aware of is on the Effects button right here. As we double click that, 3D rotation. And before actually making a change there's something else down here that I'm going to change. Watch the chart as I uncheck the box for right angle axes. It changes that into a perspective. And now maybe these rotation options are going to have some real meaning as I start clicking the little up or down arrows to the right of the 20 degrees. Now, it's not clear exactly what the numbers mean, but as you do this, you can see what's happening to the chart. And at different times, that's going to make it easier to read. Also, the Y rotation here, notice what's happening this way too. And it's pretty apparent that some of those choices are not great choices. Some are a lot better. And perspective here, I almost want to call distortion, because look what happens here as you start clicking some of these buttons. Now, again, I think these charts are attention-getting, no question about that. The question is, in some people's minds, what do the numbers really mean? Do we have to know the numbers? Sometimes yes, sometimes not. But at least consider some of these options here. And also a reminder, too, in charts of this type, the area in the back here is called a back wall. And we could give it a certain color. And by double-clicking here, we can actually see off to the right here with the paint bucket. We could fill that with different colors if we wanted to, gradients, all these kinds of things, maybe solid fill, give it a color out there. Blue wall, maybe a bit too prominent. How about a light color that way? Got the same idea over here. We don't necessarily have to choose all these, but you get some ideas there about what you might want to use for color. And there's even a floor here. And maybe getting a little bit off base here, we could use a texture fill here, and why not under textures? How about oak floors? There we are, we've got oak floors here. Anyway, we're getting far afield. The point is, this is a chart you might see from time to time. A specialized version, a 3D column chart. And earlier in this course, we saw some of the variations on columns and bars, and the idea that many, many times it's just a question of judgment, which one looks better. You're likely to see column charts a lot more frequently. And keep in mind, too, there is that one particular example we saw earlier where maybe a bar chart's going to be better for this kind of situation here because it's much, much easier to read the labeling. So lots of combinations here we've seen, and lots of variations with column and bar charts.